Hey there, welcome to episode 47 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording this at 9:15 a.m. on October 2nd, 2024. Happy Wednesday, whichever day you're listening to this, call it Wednesday. Today we are going to speak about my one and only .com that I worked for during both tours in Silicon Valley. I have talked more generally about my two tours. I did move to Silicon Valley from when I graduated from college in 1993. So entered 93 just as things were starting to get interesting. Coincidence? Perhaps. I was there until August of 2001, having had enough. The .com boom had fizzled out, the .com bust, etc. So in August of 2001, I moved back to Phoenix, thinking lower costs of living, remote work, and so on. All that changed on September 11th, of course, 2001. Several years later, in 2004, 4 years, I moved back to Silicon Valley to work with Salon. And that is my only .com in all those years, 13 or so. The rest of the time was mostly hardware or non-.com style efforts. Unless you count my food truck stuff, there would have been a website tool platform involved with that, but that was mostly the owners association. But that's a story I've already told. So today we will talk about Salon.com. Salon.com, my only .com. I am drinking tea again. If you listen to my other audio programs, I'm trying to tackle my morning voice situation with some nice hot tea. It's Egyptian licorice, anise. So we'll see how things go. The super hot temperatures. I mean, it is October 2nd, and it's supposed to be 100 degrees here in lovely Las Vegas, our oasis in the desert. And by now it should be cooler. The weather should be nicer. Not quite. So I think it's continuing the effects on my sinuses and my voice. So we'll see if we can make it all the way through. So with that, hopefully wherever you've found this audio program, you've located the episode description. Within there are show notes. There's a summary of today's show, which I will read to you now. A summary as more of an introduction, but the summary part is visible, hopefully, to those who find my audio programs. And there will be the usual links to shameless self-promotion, 2 about Salon, total 4. So let's begin, shall we? Today's summary. The .com boom was a big thing. I don't know if have you heard of it? And I happen to have been in Silicon Valley for it. For better or worse, though. I only worked at one actual .com during my time, two times, and it was during my second tour. An interesting time at Salon.com, ... Today's links, like I said, include the usual shameless self-promotion, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, and Ko-fi, Ko-fi, Ko-fi.com/DanHugo. You are under no obligation to spend any money at either. Buymeacoffee.com, especially the profile page on which I have links to my various audio programs, GitHub projects, some other things, including a list of my favorite, lately, coffee beans that I get periodically. Any money that anyone injects into my projects through either of these sites does go towards the purchase of coffee, which is powering all of my efforts. Can't pay bills with coffee, but it is still an essential ingredient. Buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo and Ko-fi.com, Ko-fi.com/DanHugo. These are frequently used by open source projects, content creators, and so on. It's an easy way, and it's sort of recognized and generally acceptable. So that's where I began using these. So it continues, and so you will see those links in perpetuity. The other two are about today's topic. Salon.com, a link to their main website. That is Salon Today. It looks very different. It doesn't look particularly unusual or novel. It looks pretty standard. Standard news magazine style display. The old Salon, when I was working there around 2005, 2006, did I start working there? Yeah, September 2005, I think it was. The the site had more thought was put into, and I will I will tell you this seemed odd to me at the time, but now I understand. But at the time it was, should this be one gray pixel or two gray pixels between this section and that section? And we're talking about gutters or in this case borders and margins and so on, the padding, the other CSS power. And this is back in the old CSS days. So today the tools are many. The feature set of CSS3 and beyond, more than we had to work with at the time. I did not touch on website design much, although I sat in on the meetings. It was a real thing that they really spent time on. So good for them back then. Now, let me take one more look here. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of every other news site. Big image, small images on either side. They don't have as much obtrusive advertising, so good for them on that. But anyway, yeah, it's a much more standard looking website, for better or worse. So check that out if you've never heard of Salon. They are slightly left on the political spectrum, only slightly, and worth checking out. There are still characters from that time frame. Literally today, King Kaufman had posted on a Mastodon instance about the debates, whether the debates are valuable. And I made a suggestion to him. And not that I knew these people intimately, but King Kaufman was a writer at the time for Salon, among other places. Cory Doctorow and Boing Boing. I used to see faxes from Cory on the old fax machine. And for those of you unaware, a fax machine is not worth thinking about, so don't bother. But faxes from the various contract writers and contributors and remote people and so on. So Cory, King, a variety of other people that were in on Salon, which was quite old at the time I joined. I believe it was 10 years old, and it was a public company for some amount of that 10 years. One profitable quarter at that time, which had just passed. So I guess they were feeling saucy. So I moved up there, which I'll get to. And then I do have a link specifically to Salon had a special feature on Abu Ghraib. If you don't recall that, you should read about it sometime, history being what it was. So there's an article, an introduction to the Abu Ghraib topic. It's from March of 2006. It was an interesting time at Salon during that time. It was an interesting time in the world and America's place in it and some of the activities regarding, the way treatment of renditions. How about that? Renditions in countries that were allied countries that were totally fine with rendition. So not a popular way to do things, but this is what things were doing. And so Salon had a lot of images, and we'll talk about that later. But anyway, there's a link to that, so you can kind of get some reference to that. I post that because it was specifically not sensationalized at the time. So kudos to Salon, the editorial staff and so on, for presenting a story that they had information on without making it hype. So yes, of course, they were featuring, here's our expose on Abu Ghraib with his catalog of photographs and so on. And we'll get to some of the specifics, but I thought it was handled reasonably well at the time, as I recall it. So on that note, let's get into it. First, I had to get back to Silicon Valley. I had moved back to Phoenix in August of 2001. Perfect timing. Any notion of remote Silicon Valley gigs disappeared in early December or September, of course. Quite literally, my plan was to move to Phoenix and work remotely for places, do some consulting. My rent had dropped significantly by moving away from Silicon Valley and back to Phoenix. So had money in the bank, big plans. Suddenly, it was very dry. After a 4-year stint in the desert, I got a call. One of the guys who had interviewed me at Supermac, which was my first job in Silicon Valley after graduation. So Supermac, a job I relocated to Silicon Valley for, interviewed by this person. Come 2005, get another call from person. Now that person did not call me. I'm not going to name him because he's on to other things. He did not call me to interview at Supermac. That was yet a different person, but he was somebody I worked with a lot at Supermac. So when he contacted me, he had just gotten his master's degree, perhaps, in policy. So he was leaning into economics and sort of how governments function, how economies function. And he somehow took a job at Salon. His role was going to be like market analytics. So understanding the readership, the topics, which ones were more popular, which ones could aid the company in making money. And do recall, they had just had the first profitable quarter. So they were probably thinking, ooh, how can we do this again? Production by a street, if you heard that car go by. So he took that job, and then he was apparently looking for more. He said, hey, they want to implement this feature. Right now, the letters to the editor is a classic newspaper style feature. They literally get an email. They figure out if they want to post it on the site, and they answer it and so on. So it's very paper style. And they wanted to basically add comments to their articles, to their content. And remember, this was 2005, so this was kind of a new thing. Like, should we have people commenting on articles? But I'll get to that in a second. So to test the waters, we would do a little remote work, which I did. Worked on the thing that I would be working on with them in the first part of 2005. Then we decided, maybe I should fly up there. So sometime during my 4 years in Phoenix, I had decided to learn how databases work. I mean, real databases, not FileMaker. Because I ran in Apple circles for a long time, or Apple related, Claris FileMaker was FileMaker Pro even. It was very popular. And I'm sure it's a real database from some angles. But no, not FileMaker. No, we're talking real stuff like MySQL, PostgreSQL, which was not nearly so popular at the time. Always slower. Postgres is slower than MySQL. Who would use that? At the same time, a friend of mine from Apple, the guy with the jacked up El Camino, if anybody remembers that, he was working. He had moved to Chico, California. Chino is in Southern California, Chino Hills, Chico, California, and was working at a plumbing or a construction supply, like home improvement supply company, which was very small at the time, and it grew substantially. So they were all using like one computer logged into it from like cheaper, small computers. So they're all sharing one development machine, which was hosting their database. The development machine may have been their production machine. I don't recall directly, but they would all log in as root. They all had super user access to the database. Occasionally they would drop the database, which means delete it. And their Oracle database manager, we called him Ogma, Oracle guy, my ass. Pardon me for injecting a small amount of humor. Ogma, we referred to him as Ogma. He didn't seem to know what he was doing. So anyone who allows all of your developers access to dropping the entire database at any time, no thank you. So Jim, learned how to deal with the Oracle database, and PostgreSQL seemed to have some similar features like stored procedures or functions at the time, and now procedures also, and views and schema for namespaces and so on. So it had enough in common that I started picking up Postgres while he was learning more about Oracle DB, and so that became useful. We learned how to get around some of the issues he was encountering up there in Chico, like people dropping the database, like I said, or not understanding how SQL works in general, which is more pervasive. Like, it's very rare that people have access to dropping a database. That can be catastrophic. Usually there's a backup, hopefully. So unnecessary drama and downtime. But not knowing how SQL works and thinking you do and coming up with broken queries is not uncommon at all. And so we started learning like some best practices or some different methods, and so it was useful. Salon had been around for about 10 years and always leading the way, except in profitability, as I mentioned. It was going to enable normal people to comment on each and every article. This was initially probably probably stayed that way throughout. It was initially unpopular with the paid journalists and writers and other content contributors that were working for Salon, especially the people in the office, the kind of the full-time writers. The thought of anyone anywhere, this was a really passionate commentary that was being made. You could see them being frustrated by this. Anyone anywhere being able to put their commentary beside professional work and have it all be presented together was off-putting. Like, wait, I'm an actual journalist. I'm doing real work, and you're going to print whatever they want to say right next to it as if it's the same value. And that was not an unreasonable observation. Today, it is of course normal, even expected, to have comments on articles and other content. Join the discussion, etc. But back then, this was not common at all. So this was a new thing. And Salon had acquired The Well, which was a community website. It was mostly like discussion forums and so on. But they had built up this community, and the people that made The Well work, I think there were 2 people that were in the office all the time. They participated in these conversations about how do we add comments that appear. So like a discussion forum for communities in general, that's, everybody's chiming in on stuff, and there's no expectation that someone is professional. Almost like if you had amateur photographers commenting on professional photographic work, there's probably a similar level of like, wait, I've been doing this I get a lot of money. Here's my catalog. Why are you commenting with your little point and shoot, or nowadays, your iPhone camera? Those have come a long way. But anyway, there was a sort of I do this professionally. Who is this person commenting on the same page? Today, there's much to ponder today. From the initial reaction, I think, was right. Maybe enabling anyone to comment about anything was not so great an idea. It was all a precursor of sorts to the Open Salon project, which I was not involved with. But the notion of creating like a citizen journalism component to Salon was also unpopular because of just how it would be branded. Like, wait, is Salon professionals doing professional work, covering stories and even editorials, and what was the messaging here? That was beyond what I was involved with. So I was not involved with Open Salon, although I understand it did catch on somewhat. It had a community of people using it, community, small c, of course. I think it's dead. I haven't heard about it in a while. Actually, since we're here, since we have the internet at our disposal, yes. I'm not laughing at them. It's very stark. If you go to opensalon.co, the word you see in the search results on Google, for example, Open Salon is now closed. Oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry, totally. That was an actual salon platform. Open Salon. So Open Salon, if you were thinking of doing, if you were thinking of creating some hair and nails services, Open Salon is now closed. But here, yeah, interesting. I'm going to add this to the links. So this is an audible. Open Salon. So the deal was, this is the announcement from 2008, and it's by Joan Walsh, who was the editor-in-chief at the time. Fun fact, there was a bar across the street from Salon in the Rincon Center. So I have had drinks with Joan Walsh, for what that's worth. I don't think we agree on a lot of things, but that's okay. Anyway, so yeah, there was pushback on the part of the professional content contributors, journalists, writers, and so on. And I think that was, in retrospect, well conceived. Maybe not well presented. It was really more of a, what are you, nuts? But I think from a practical standpoint, the thing is, on the internets, nobody knows your dog, as they say. But there is no credibility assigned. I'm sorry, there is no credibility attached to an individual or their commentary. So yeah, everybody does come across as the same, but that's not necessarily true. If you look at the photography example, photographers, if there's a review of a camera, and there was always one of my favorite resource sites was imagingresource.com. I don't even know if that's still around. Let me see if it is real quick. I don't normally do some in-show perusing like this. Imaging resource. Yeah, look at that. So imaging-resource.com. I always, so it's kind of my go-to website for camera reviews. So, yeah, still publishing. Featured story from September 26th. They do really in-depth camera reviews. So if you look at a site like this, the person doing these reviews, they're extremely consistent. They have a collection of the same imagery, the same landscape, the same person, the same lighting, the same setting, the same image box, test images, and all that. So they do a really comprehensive examination of new camera products, and they have this huge catalog of reviewed products. So totally interesting. That person commenting on a camera or on a photo, if right next door, if right as a response or in the same thread or however they're laid out, if someone makes their comment and says, well, I don't think the colors are right, or I think it's oversaturated. Like, well, who are you? This person from this site making comments like, well, I've reviewed like 1,000 cameras or whatever, I'm guessing, doing photography for 1,000,000 years and so on, but you got your Samsung Galaxy 2 and you're taking pictures of food and posting them on Twitter, like coming from two completely different places. So on the one hand, the opinion is not invalid, but on the other hand, one person really has the insight, the background, just the hands-on with a variety of devices, knows how to work them. The other person is giving a casual, like normal person comment. So they're both valid, but they're not both, I don't want to say equally credible, but there is a difference in depending on what you're looking for. Like if you're looking for a camera review, you go with the expert. If you're looking for, what do you think of this picture? Then anybody's opinion matters, right? The same. There's a technical review. There's an aesthetic review. You can get into the details. So these are the sorts of things that really become apparent if you do the deep dive into how the exciting world of internet comments works. And we did that. We found out some of the interesting aspects, and the well people were instrumental in some of the considerations, but there were some things to think about as far as anonymous commenting, moderation, and so on, which we'll get to. So I started working on this when I was in Phoenix, and then I made the move. So I flew up there to San Francisco, met with the salon crew. We decided that my becoming an employee would work out nicely, though. And they had a profitable quarter, so they had some money to burn, I guess. But they were not paying Silicon Valley software engineer salaries. They were paying come and work at salon.com. We're a 10-year-old startup, public company startup. So there was not a salary which I would. I'm not complaining, but it was not kind of on the trajectory of my previous salary history. But then this was a new time. It was post 9/11 times. There was no relocation, so I had to deal with that myself. But I would return to the job market that suited me better than did Phoenix, so that was a good thing. Since I was more familiar with the South Bay and Sunnyvale in particular, and since the cost of renting a place to live would be lower than in San Francisco, that was, now it seems so obvious. But even, Santa Clara County, where Sunnyvale is located, is famously stable and strong when it comes to real estate. So it's not like it was dirt cheap. It was just lower rents and so on. And I was familiar with the area, of course, having lived there for several years. So I literally went to a coffee shop in downtown Sunnyvale, which I had very rarely visited when I was living in Sunnyvale. And I used to live easy walking distance to downtown Sunnyvale. I just never took the time. I was always heading off to work. So I visited a coffee shop on Murphy Avenue and cracked open a very simple laptop that I had, an old Compaq, super cheap, and started looking at places, Craigslist, and trying to find available properties. And I found one. It was a duplex. Owner lived in half of it, small family of three. And it was the back of their backyard was the easement fence for Caltrain. And my plan was to take the train so that I wouldn't have to commute on the 101, which is famously annoying. And I wouldn't have a carpool person with me, so just me. So yipes. So I did find a place near the Caltrain station. It was maybe 4 to 5 minutes walking, especially when when someone cut a hole in the fence. Then it cut down significantly to walk onto the northbound side of the tracks. So I was on the northbound side. So if I didn't have to walk all the way down to the end of the street, go to the intersection, cross, get into the train station, even walking on so without all that, somebody cut a hole in the fence, and then they figured, the hole in the fence seems to work. So they kind of left it. I don't know if it's still there now, but so with the hole in the fence, piece of cake, 4 minutes. I could almost hear the train coming and start walking to the station, board the train fairly easily. Got my monthly pass. Was all set. The train ride to San Francisco from Sunnyvale, if I caught the early express trains, you can put express in quotes, it skipped some stops. So every other train would stop in Sunnyvale, and then every other train would stop in Mountain View, for example. So there were 6 express trains each direction, morning and then in the evening. So I could catch any of the express trains. For the shortest trip time, we're talking maybe 55 versus 70 minutes for a normal train, so not a huge deal. But after a while, those minutes start to add up. Commuting by train was a little bit taxing, but mostly far easier and better in all ways than driving a car. I could take a nap on the train. I could. They were fairly lax with eating. I one time saw a guy bring a pizza and a bottle of wine onto the train. He got the facing seat section, so he had 2 seats, empty seats facing him, so he had a nice space to spread out. Had his pizza, had his bottle of wine, small bottle, and enjoyed his dinner for one on the way home. Very nice. So I was totally fine with the train. It does get a little bit taxing every once in a while to ride a train every day, but it's okay. Again, like I said, super easy compared to a daily commute in traffic. If you're by yourself, you have nobody to talk to, you're listening to the radio, you're yelling at the radio, you're yelling at other cars. You can be having pizza and a bottle of wine on a train. Why would you do anything else? So my train experiences were generally positive. So yeah, it was a good deal. The Rincon Center, where Salon was located, I don't know if they still are, was about 1.5 miles, I think, from the San Francisco train station, the end of the line. So we'd pull into the station. There was a light rail that was, the light rail station was next to the train station, and it would go all the way around on the bay side of, I can't remember the name of the street. Yeah, I totally spaced. You can look at a map. It's a well-known street. I would walk on Townsend, so it was direct. I could jump onto the light rail, but the light rail timings were not, I don't know who plans commuting. I would have had to wait like 15 or 20 minutes to get the light rail, and I could walk to Salon in that time, basically. So I just walked, got a little morning walk in every day, and walked to the Rincon Center. And so I would get, because of the express train schedules and whatnot, I would get to Salon almost without fail. I don't think there was really much variation. As long as the train was on time, the walk took about the same amount of time. So I'd get into the office around 7 a.m., the next person to come into the, and so I was first. I was the first one. Turn on the lights, etc. And it was way better to get in there early. Doing the pedestrian thing in San Francisco was something of a challenge occasionally, because there was a couple of streets. Sometimes I would vary my route. So some streets were a little bit dodgy with traffic, but in the morning, not as much. So the 7 a.m. early riser schedule was fine. There was a guy in accounting who was the second person, formerly the first person, to always get in. And at some point, and he sat like four cube rows, I guess, I don't know, maybe 3 away from me. So it's not like we missed each other. Like, oh, you're here, I'm here, yep. And he said, hey, since you get in first, you want me to show you how to start the coffee in the morning? And I was like, yeah, that sounds like a good deal. So they had a kind of a weird, very kind of oversized, I think, for the size of the office, but It looked fairly substantial, and even maybe could service a double the amount of employees. But we would start the coffee in the morning, and I have to say, without adjustment, it was provided by a coffee service, so the supplies and the maintenance and so on. So the coffee, it had a kind of a shower head and a very large coffee basket, I guess, for the filter, filter basket, and pre-measured coffee bags and so on. And so you turn it on here, you flip that there, and you set it to brew here, and here's where the coffee is, and if you got a clean, so we went through the whole 2-minute introduction to how this thing worked. Pretty automated. The coffee was always bitter, and now we know how to fix that. So it was over brewed, right? So you could probably could have reduced the amount of coffee in the filter as a first experiment, see how that would go. There weren't a lot of knobs and dials on it. It was pretty much set at the factory. But anyway, so that was my first contribution to the day, because I would get there so regularly and first start the coffee for a variety of reasons, none of them really good. I would tend to stay at work until around 8 p.m. So I would try to catch one of those express trains going south so that I would, get home at a reasonable time. That very rarely worked. And in fact, different people getting into work at different times, got to talk to this person, having a meeting, getting that working, trying out a new thing, different discussions, actual work, sometimes after work chat about something other than work. It was a generally friendly workplace, so it was a fun group of people in general. And so the work days tended to be long for no real reason. I could very easily have said I'm out and leave. There was no pressure to stay late. Occasionally we'd go to dinner, so there'd be like, hey, you want to go try this new whatever place, or do you want to go here or there? We would do that. It was easy to get around in the city on the bus, so not having a car was a piece of cake. Go up to North Beach, go to the Haight, different places, different spots to check out. And then I would have to just make it back to the train station by midnight for the last train. And that was always the longest of long days. My work day during the week was get up, catch that express train going north, walk to the office, get to the office, do my super long day that was unnecessary, get home really ideally by 9, 10. And I had a bed, but I had a papasan chair, if you remember those. And I would watch TV, like the news and stuff, and fall asleep on my papasan chair and wake up the next morning to do the whole thing over again. So it was not healthy to maintain this schedule as I was. It was essentially living to get on that train and go to work. But that was 20 years ago. So fun fact, somewhere in the state of California, somewhere in that time frame when I was at Salon, they had implemented an overtime scheme for exempt employees of companies. So if you were working for a company as an exempt employee and your take-home pay, you're exempt, you're not working hourly. But if you divided your work hours by your time, and if your actual hourly fell below minimum wage, then you were subject to overtime. And so there were two problems. One, I was not being forced to be in there for long days, although I was productive for the long days. So I would get there first thing in the morning. There was real work. Like I didn't get into work and stare out the window for 3 hours. So legitimately useful to be there, but not required to be there. But I did cross over that threshold where I was not being paid sufficiently for the hours put in, but again, not required to put those hours in. So that was kind of a gray area. The second problem though, if you are the person that makes that complaint, you can file a complaint with the labor board, and they'd be subject to treble damages and all this. Good luck after that. Oh, you did that? I don't want to deal with you. So it became clear that I should just let that go, which I did. So comment learnings. What did we learn? So given the times, the implementation of the comment feature was an interesting learning experience, as most things are, especially fitting it into a legacy of many regime changes There was spaghetti code. There were different databases. So an Oracle database, MySQL for subscriptions, PostgreSQL for comments. The Oracle database was many years out of date from a licensing standpoint. So it was a free version of Oracle database running on a Sun server in an on-site, like, here's the server room. And the server would occasionally require a power cycling, essentially kicking the side of it to make it come back on. And like the entire company is based on this machine working. Like, oh yeah, if this goes down, we have no backups, or no, we have no legitimate backups, right? We can't really get it running on something else. So that machine was all that was standing between up and down, which is crazy today, right? Today they would be, I'm assuming they're running on a cloud somewhere. They're all good. So fitting into this regime changes, there was Java code, there was PHP code, the main content management system, which they had released when they first wrote it as bricolage, Perl based. If you've ever written Perl, you probably aren't still writing in Perl. Spaghetti code, like I said, so just kind of a mess, no real architecture, more patching and making things work. And since the coding team was essentially 3 people when I was there, we had to be creative to fit all this together. So we made some very, very, very bad habits, normal, such as editing live on the site. There was no notion of like, okay, let's commit that, let's test it, let's push it up to, no, it's just log into the server and change it. Simply awful, but a good learning experience still. The letters to the editor, the comments server was 1 machine. The main content was probably like 5 machines. So doing live edits on the comment server was simple, but it was simply awful. It was a good learning experience about what not to do, but it was still very much a startup 10 years in. The readership seemed to be reasonably accepting of some of the shenanigans, the wonky behavior now and then, stuff just not working and then coming back later. Though today this methodology would be laughable. There'd be no way that this would be acceptable in any way, especially paying subscribers, paying advertisers. Considerations around anonymous posts, moderation, and even simple things like paging for long comment threads. Like, you should be able to land directly on the page with the comment that you posted. But for a while we had growing pages, kind of like infinite scroll, but with paging. So the page that your comment was on could move around. And so then there was an argument about there should be basically a permalink that was on the page, that was the page, not, yes, the comment, but the comment should always be on the same page. Got it? Is that true? You could tell when, we had an option to only display comments for people logged in, I think. Display logged in comments of people that were members that were logged in to people who were logged in. But if you were not logged in, you could not see and not. We had all these different rules that we were experimenting with. So the page would vary anyway based on the number of comments you were seeing. It was a little bit of chaos, but again, interesting from an experimental point of view. And this was kind of new. It was a new thing. Should there be threads? Should there be threaded comments versus flat comments? It was a lot of stuff to think about. Like, how do you engage with a public community of people who just want to share their thoughts or be mean? Any number of things. Now it's old hat, but at the time it was still new. So interesting. So once we got the letters to the editor feature basically working, what next? So I'd move on to the next thing, which was fixing the subscriber database and dealing with some of the payment processing stuff that was making about 30% of Salon's revenue. The system was absolute chaos with no notion of accounting best practices, the ability for people to modify individual subscription values manually without any checking for validity. The list goes on. I actually met with the 3-person accounting team, remember the one that would get there early in the morning, to go over their requirements. Like, what do you need? What's not working right now? No, by the way, there was no bug database or anything. There was no notion of that. So this was a new notion to have someone ask, can you tell me what you need in the accounting department for this public company? Imagine someone asking that. They were a little bit shocked. So little things like running reports over specific time intervals rather than just whenever would lead to automated reports that would actually add up correctly. That was one day, I think her name was Violet, said, hey, when we get the dailies and then the weekly, The daily should add up to the weekly, but it does not. And so it turned out that different people had written the queries in different languages, Java, Perl, and they were running the queries now. And if anyone's ever done any accounting database stuff, you don't do now because things can change now. So you run the report after midnight for a time period ending at midnight. So nothing is changing anymore when you run the report. Pretty basic, but not when you just let people do whatever they want. So with no notion of accounting best practices, they were getting all kinds of numbers that were wrong, didn't make sense, and that's what they had to deal with. So suddenly they had someone that was going to take this seriously, which I did. Unfortunately, we discovered over time the mess that I inherited was hiding. So I discovered it reasonably quickly, probably in the first month of going through everything, seeing how it worked. But this was years of just, well, the big one, there were problems. The big one that's easiest to explain. You could gift a sub. Nowadays, this is commonplace. You know, you can gifted subs, 20 gifted subs announced during a live stream, etc. So these are not new things. So gifting someone a subscription to salon.com was implemented. It existed, and people were taking advantage of it quite often. I think probably what ended up happening was that someone would have a subscription, then there'd be a promotion, like gift a sub and get a free book. So they had these premium promotion items, like books or T-shirts or whatever, just some cool thing. So someone might gift themselves a sub, like, yeah, I'll just use my other email address. Piece of cake, right? And then you cancel it. Well, anyway, you had a lot of gift subscriptions that were not necessarily well accounted for. And, the other thing was you could gift someone a subscription if they already had a subscription. So you're basically saying, oh, you already subscribe? Well, here, let me spend $50 or $40, whatever, and get you another year because I know you're a big salon fan. Okay, great. Thank you. But that would be counted as a new gift subscription. So things like that, just badly implemented. How do I describe this? If you add in the manual data edits, so what is it? PHP MySQL was this abomination that should never have existed anywhere. Enabled people. So if somebody called customer service and said, hey, my subscription, I paid for it and it expired and whatever. Oh, okay, let me go. And so she would add extra months. So the person who was doing it used she. So I have. It didn't matter who the person was. The fact was that this was just common practice to make these manual edits to the subscriber database. So suddenly now you're getting, hand adjusted without any regard to subscription length or what other reports were written, because every subscription is a sort of liability, right? You've got to deliver something to people, and they were doing accrual accounting. So the subscription period was how they would accrue and account for the income spread over the time and all that. So all this stuff wasn't all connected together. Production by a street, if you can hear the emergency vehicle. So we ended up with absolute, completely incoherent data for subscribers, subscriber count, who was owed what, did they get the book they were promised, the premium item, did that ever happen? Just generally bad planning and implementation without any regard for best practices, like I said. So, and there were other problems. But the take home was, and this was the big find, for a company that had been public for 10 years, where subscriber information is part of the quarterly and annual filings, because this is part of your business, this is part of your ongoing, a subscriber would be an asset, but the subscription would be a liability, I guess. So you're making money, and this is future viability of the company is based on recurring subscriptions and the number of subscribers who are maintaining their subscriptions. So over time, you show this growing subscriber count, you show this revenue stream, everything looks good in your quarterly and annual filings. But it turns out all those numbers were wrong. These discrepancies would have led to all manner of refilings and amendments and announcing errors and so on. So the CFO told me to stop working on that stuff. I think he put his fingers in the ears and said, blah, 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 stop telling me, stop talking to me. So that never got fixed. And I was hitting the end of my rope around that time. Priority inversion, another practical example of education in a workplace. Now, as I mentioned, I was always working in hardware. I had worked at Philips Electronics with microcontroller stuff. I had worked at Leapfrog Toys on microcontroller-based educational toys. So a lot of microcontroller work, a lot of hardware. So one of the things you'll come across is called priority inversion, where low priority interrupts, low priority things take up more time and can sometimes disable or interfere with the handling of higher priority interrupts, right? So if there's a doorbell interrupt and a fire alarm interrupt, if the system is configured so that if somebody keeps ringing your doorbell and you don't answer it, or maybe you do answer it, but somebody just keeps ringing your doorbell, they may interfere with getting your fire alarm interrupt. Your fire alarm may be going off and you're like, I got to get the door. So priority inversion inverts the priority. What's important is not getting done, because what is not important is taking up too much time. That's a quick and simple explanation. So Salon was made up of left-leaning journalists, idealists, accountants, ad salespeople, the usual collection of nice people with great intentions. They were not trying to break things. They were not a group of technical people who would dive into the details beyond the website design itself, since it was visible, and even then it was something that didn't really get attention so frequently. They did a couple of design changes, minor, major, during my reasonably short time with Salon. But that's where most of the technical attention would go, is page layout. And that's fine. That was the product. The bulk of Salon's revenue, again, a public company, came from advertising. So managing ad inventory and filling that inventory with ads in some optimal way was essential. And they had software to do this. Luckily, ad sales and ad placement on inventory and so on was not new. It's just that they were not taking full advantage of that. Unfortunately, as with the subscriber database, ad selection and rotation for the available inventory tended to be adjusted manually. Over time, it was clearly visible that you could look at the display counts and click through and all that. Over time, it was clearly visible that lower paying campaigns were delivered more often than higher paying campaigns for no reason. And often free house ads. The house ad is where you're advertising like, hey, subscribe to Salon, or hey, check out our feature coming up on something, or check out the latest from Cory Doctorow. So you're just advertising internally. They're totally free, no revenue. So house ads are being displayed more often than the paying ads. So this is a bad idea if that's where your money is coming from. It was an expensive realization, but it was the ads people a few cubes over, and nobody thought to look. Like, they were literally adjusting, like, ooh, we should change this value. We should see this ad more often over here. And they were adjusting things without knowing how pervasive the changes would be across the entire website and all of the inventory. Those are places where you can display ads. So obviously letting the computer do the work works well for things like, orbital insertion burns and other sci-fi coolness. The computer has to do it. There's no way a human could do it quick enough. You always hear those things if you're a sci-fi person. But that's generally true anyway. Able to do things with precise timing that humans cannot match. I mean, come on, computers are just faster at some things. Here, too, letting the computer do what it was intended to do would have made probably a visible difference at the bottom line each quarter. But instead, there was a person turning the dials without quite understanding what was going on. And without the feedback loop of looking at actual ad delivery, different campaigns, different campaign pricing, I guess. It was best intentions were literally driving ad revenue down, which is not desirable. And we're almost done, I promise. The traffic opportunity missed. Now this one, I'll be careful about how, because this is not about the actual content so much. It's not about capitalizing monetarily on the tragedy and the suffering that was associated with this. So it is a specific case, but more an indicator of a general problem. In the links, I did have the introduction to the Abu Ghraib series, which included a ton of imagery and some news coverage at the time. It was a very bad situation uncovered at Abu Ghraib. If you don't know or don't recall, not our finest hour, and we have stacks of calendars filled with less than fine hours, but this was not a fine hour. At the time, there was a heavy promotion of the expose, and it was going to run completely ad-free to respect the victims and the situation. So they were going to present the entire series of photos in a special photo, like a pop-up photo viewer with no advertising. By the way, here's a little insight into exactly why, because we did add Google ads at some point, so there was content-based advertising and prepaid CPM, click-through rate, advertising campaigns with clients. So it was a mixture of different advertising. No advertiser for Salon wanted to I don't really want my ads next to that stuff. It's a little dark, and rightfully so. So there was some experimenting. Like, what would happen if we just had a little Google AdSense, right? AdWords. AdSense is the money making, right? And AdWords is the advertising. No, AdSense, right? So we had an AdSense block that we would stick in the inventory there. So normally there was not going to be inventory. Like, okay, let's just try. Let's see what would happen. And because it was the early days of AdSense, right? This was 20 years ago. Not the early days, but it was a long time ago. So all of the advertising that would appear would be handcuffs. I'll just leave it there. It would not have been anywhere near appropriate to include any form of automated content-based advertising. No advertisers wanted to pay. So it was a decision that was made that was going to be made for them either way. Right? We can't allow these ads, and no one else wants to put proper ads. So completely ad-free. A good decision anyway. So we could see very clearly in the dramatic spike in traffic to the site, to the Abu Ghraib feature specifically, that people were going through all of it and then leaving. So this was, if you've ever looked at website traffic graphs, this was so far out of normal that essentially all traffic up to the launch of this expose feature, all traffic prior for months, 3 months, 6 months, looked like zero. It was relatively zero compared to the ridiculous spike in traffic. Like, everybody was visiting, probably Drudge Report linked to it, various other news outlets linked to it. So there was a lot of incoming traffic, tons. And of course, there was no advertising, so it was completely free. But there was also nothing to keep people who were clearly interested in this topic engaged in the topic. Just imagine, and at the time, podcasting was a thing. It was still not universally, like, not everyone had 4 podcasts going. But at the time, podcasts were a thing. There could have been a focused discussion group. We had The Well. There could have been an entire little community formation around America's behavior and the war on terror and all that. This incident in particular, more generally, like, what's going on? Where are we in the world? So you could have actual discussions. Hey, join the discussion about this and related. You could have a podcast about talking more about the details of this and then continuing on with related adjacent topics and so on. There could have been an email newsletter for updates and ongoing discussion. Almost anything to maintain engagement with this vertical group that would have been worth attempting. And again, this was Salon. They just had their profitable quarter, probably the only one. I don't know. So they were feeling good, but not quite ready to go diving in with both feet, I guess you could say, which is unfortunate. So at the end of the day, the special expose was a blip on the radar. It was a highly visible blip. You basically had to take out the outlier data to get any usable visual representation of the traffic to the site. All the site traffic dropped back down to normal, very low levels within a few days. There was really no lingering return. Normal spikes would have come from things like Drudge. A Drudge mention brought a lot of traffic. Some other high-profile mentions. A particularly interesting article, editorial, presentation, etc. And because of the external content creators contributing to the site, there was that name recognition. So, the site got some reasonable traffic. had reasonable subscription numbers, maybe too reasonable, but that's the way that went. So nowhere near that one though. And in all cases, there was very little done to try to maintain that engagement. So whether it was the expose spike or just in general, there was really, okay, you came to the site, then you left. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow, I guess. It was a systemic issue that would not be solved by the likes of me, because it would have required kind of a revamping of how a visitor. So essentially, the Facebook versus Google problem. Google literally built their business initially on sending you away from their site. Here's some links that you were looking for. See ya. So that was the style of traffic that Salon was getting. They really needed to consider how to keep people stickiness, right? Hey, welcome to Salon. Since you've read this, would you be interested in these? Would you like to participate in a community discussion? Hey, we have a monthly podcast where we invite readers, whatever. They could have done all manner of things to kind of, you could call it community building, but the chat, right? They could very easily have done a live stream if there was such a thing at the time. But the equivalent of that would have been something like a call-in or the equivalent of a Discord server, right? These things existed in various forms. So again, the well could have been instrumental in building up particularly topic-focused, topic of the day, obviously political focus. So there were all kinds of opportunities that were missed. And I do have to say, this is a weird comparison, so don't read too much into this. But I used to work at Netscape, and seated across the cube wall from me, other side, was one of the founders of Rotten.com. So initially he launched Rotten, an archive of disturbing illustration, because there were some websites that were getting reasonable traffic, and this was the early days, right? This was 96, 98, 97, somewhere in there, 1997, call it that. So people were visiting websites with disturbing illustrations. I think one of them was Dan's Dungeon, no relation. Just some awful imagery nowadays, old hat. So one day I ran into this person. I don't know if he wants me saying who he is because he's kind of low key. He said, hey, Dan's Dungeon shut down, so I got all their content. I was like, oh, what happened? He's like, they just didn't feel like running it anymore. So he said, I'm launching a website called Rotten, which will be this archive of this stuff. And it was not particularly, it was no more popular than Dan's Dungeon or anything. So it was fine. They were running it on they had a T1 line going into their house, and they had some Sun servers, and so they would host websites and so on. One day, someone sent him an alleged photo, and unfortunately, if anybody remembers the car crash that took the lives of the Princess Diana and her fiance, I think, Dodi Al-Fayed, I think it was. And I think the driver and then the bodyguard survived, but what a mess. So somebody sent what turned out to be a fake photo to Rotten, and he posted it, and he said, this is supposedly, and Rotten was not a journalism site, so nobody held them to that was fake. Who knows? Who knows where any of this stuff? It was disturbing illustration, not journalistically authentic, vetted information. So guess what happened? Howard Stern said, I found this picture on this horrible website called Rotten.com. And disturbingly much like, because I think he showed me at some point, the traffic that came from one Howard Stern mention about this picture, which turned out to be fake, was astronomical. Put Rotten on the map. But here's the thing. They didn't have a traffic spike. They had sustainable growth in visitor traffic, ongoing. Howard Stern would mention them a few more times, here and there on different things that they would add. They added more of almost like a blog of sorts, like kind of an ongoing stream of new editions that were possibly topical with the news of the day and so on. So they kind of built on this opportunity that fell in their laps. And it was kind of interesting because at the time, here's a little nerd fact, because they were delivering images, and images take a while to download, and probably none of you listening to this now remember the slow line by line image download, progressive JPEGs, all that to get around this. But you had people visiting the Rotten website, which was hosted on a T1 line, which was, if you have DSL today, probably half as fast. And if you have a cable modem, forget about it. Ridiculously faster cable modem. So if you visited rotten.com, like everyone else listening to Howard Stern, with your 33.6 dial-up modem, and you were downloading images, this fake image from Paris, for example, your computer is taking a while to download this image. Even the T1 line, which is capable for a couple hundred connections, when you have many times that number, downloading the images, and images are slow to download. So you're downloading these images very slowly. So now all these people are connecting to the website with their slow modems and downloading images. And eventually the T1 line would get saturated. The server would start falling behind with so many open connections, trying to deliver images that were taking forever. Yeah, it got ugly. So Rotten started doing some distributed content, essentially a content delivery network of sorts that they cobbled together with some peers. They said, ooh, we should try to figure out how to make some money from this. So they literally put two little links, like, hey, support the site, 2 links. They said, yeah, we're making enough money to pay for more bandwidth. They moved Rotten to like a hosting site so that they could put more hardware, more connections. So servicing Rotten through click ads, this was before AdSense, was a real thing. And they were doing content delivery networking through their peers, through friends. Like, hey, can you host some of these images? And yeah, so they really reacted to this spike in traffic and kept it going. And Rotten really did become, not in the best way for some people, but it became a real culture thing. People were aware of it, the name recognition and all that. So I would always compare the salon experience. And again, it's tricky because, these images were very real. The situation was very real. But if we set that stuff aside, if we just look at it from a business opportunity standpoint, you have tons of people interested in the content that you're presenting, an opportunity to have this huge increase in traffic from Howard Stern or Drudge or whatever. What do you do with that? And Rotten did it and Salon did not. So on to the next things. And this is the last section. And then you too can be on to the next things. In my notice of resignation from Salon, I suggested that Salon, as a publication with talented contributors and a valuable mission, and I was definitely, they were, again, nice people doing good work. They definitely had a political opinion, and I'm not devoutly political. I listen to opinions from many sides to get some sort of a feel for just how awful everything is. But they should be focusing on content. It was sort of like a Jerry Maguire letter, right? More clients, focus more time on fewer clients, more time spent on the guy. Don't spend your money on machinery. Don't spend your money on engineering people. You're not an engineering company. You're not shipping software as a product. You should be, rather than developing new features that would receive very little in the way of exposure or attention because there's no strategy around it, they could focus on deploying their ideas and coverage of real news and interesting topics. Using WordPress, or don't spend your time inventing things. The example I would give is the New York Times is not inventing printing presses. The ones that exist are good. They use those. The Salon workplace was a fun place to work, though. It was dysfunctional a little bit, and a lot. Very little communication went on, and it was a long floor plan across the face of the Rincon Center office section, the office building, one of them. So you'd walk into the Salon offices. You could walk past the reception area. You'd look to the left. There were two cubicles deep. So window, cubicle, together, Herman Miller cubicles. And then a big giant common hallway, so cubicle, nothing. And then if you're walking in through reception, the vestibule through which you would pass, if you look to your left, there were two offices where the I don't know, production manager, I suppose, he had an office, and then the CFO I mentioned, and then the CFO was seated. Then there was this hallway, like I said, not a hallway, but it was just a common area with no cubicles. So accounting was over there. Then I think some spare space, like two empty cubicles, and then a community manager that they brought in, and my manager, then two people that were doing sort of IT system management, like making sure the server was going and kick the machine every once in a while. Then me and the two other engineering people. And then as you move down this hallway, probably kind of northish. I think we probably had western exposure. I think I could tell you exactly, but it doesn't really matter. So you'd move down this hallway. There was the advertising. Oh, the well was right next to us, engineering. So then the well people, then some other people, I think ad sales, and then the ad delivery management people, and then some other people, and then the the publishing, publishing management. So making sure the content actually appeared where it was supposed to with the correct headline and all that. And some full-time reporters and writers. Turn the corner, Betsy Hambrecht, CEO. Her dad was William Hambrecht of Hambrecht and Quist. So pretty well-known name. And Joan Walsh, she was the editor-in-chief at the time. And then before you went around the corner, there were two more offices on the side there, similar to the CFO offices, for some editor at large and some other role, and the fax machine and some other like minutia along the wall in this common hallway configuration. And you could go out through another door near the editor at large offices. There was the kitchen area. You could go out that door, go to the restrooms. You could get a coffee in the little kitchen area. So this long format for the office layout meant that people didn't really cross paths very often unless they were getting a coffee. I one time asked the accounting people if they wanted to go have lunch, like engineering and accounting, living together like cats and dogs, right? And so we met at the elevator with Betsy Hambrecht, the CEO of the company, coming up to the elevator, coming out to go into the office. I think she was with someone. So she stopped though and said, "Oh, where are you guys going?" Because she knew everybody. She was a nice person. There was no problem there. Like, "Oh, we're doing an engineering and accounting lunch." She's like, "That is great." And later she would say, it's good that people are finally getting together across their little silos. So it just needed some impetus. And I don't want to brag, but I was the one who was like, "Hey, you guys want to go to lunch?" And the look was like, are you talking to us? Like, you would want to go to lunch with us? Like, duh, let's go to lunch. So one of my other colleagues would go down to Specialty Bakery, which was literally across the street. So he'd say, "I'm going to go get some cookies. Anybody want?" And they would make hot cookies, right? So you time it right. You get cookies right out of the oven. They were very nice. Or he would walk up and down the office, kind of quietly walk up to your cubicle and make a little tea. Cookie time. So there'd be a little, like 3 or 4 people would wander down and get some cookies, bring them back. So it was a fun, like I said, a little bit dysfunctional, but a fun group of people to work with. Probably because they weren't all engineers. The fact that they were not talking to each other about work, though, is where they got into the accounting problems, the subscriber problems, the traffic problem around special features, and so on. Maybe it's an old school reporter or news organization thing, but the collaboration, if any, was on a personal level. Personal interactions tended to veer very quickly away from work. You might talk about a topic, especially if people were all politically, ideologically clustered, right? So you kind of have the same opinion. "Oh, did you see so-and-so on the news?" But it was never functional or strategic or even tactical. Like, "Hey, what should we do about this traffic spike?" Nothing like that. I'm sure there was a board meeting or some other management meeting. The editors, they would be thinking about that thing. But from a technical standpoint, there was just no real feel for how to proceed or what to even do. So it's too bad. And then, the dysfunction was literally, all you have to do is stand up and say, "Hey, ad sales people," or "Hey, accounting," or you can walk over. but I said, you could stand up and see everyone that works at this company, aside from, remote, DC correspondent or a contract content creator, etc. Cory Doctorow was not in the office, but I would see him on the fax there. So, yeah, collaboration was tricky. Communication was tricky. At the end of the day, I am glad I worked at Salon. Try to wrap this up with some tea. It was, excuse me, it was a learning experience to be sure. And on top of everything, then less famous, Farhad Manju. Of course, now everybody knows Farhad. Farhad was walking down that main hallway thing, and the coffee, like I said, always bitter, not a great experience. Got to add some sugar to it, and so I said, "Oh, did you hear that the guy that made the Aerobee is making a little device called the AeroPress? That looks kind of interesting." And Farhad was like, "Oh, what is this?" And I showed him whatever I had seen of this. He's like, "Oh, I'll contact them and see if they can send a sample, and I'll write a review about it." So he got it, and we took it into the kitchen area. So it was sent for free. I would never. I don't know if I would have even bought one, because you're like, what's this plastic thing with a plunger? Who knows? So we got it, went into the kitchen area, and we all tried making coffee with it. And Farhad's like, well, hey, this is part of my review. I want you all to tell me what you think of it and all that. And yeah, so we came away with our opinions. And let me look here real quick. Salon Farhad AeroPress. Let me see if. Not seeing. I mean, who knows? Who knows where he could have written a review somewhere else? He was not unknown, just less well known. Less well known. Farhad Manju. I know we're so close to the end of this episode, and we're almost there. Oh, sorry for the silence. There's a mention on. There's a mention on Boing Boing from Jeannie Jardin. Zini Jardin. Who I can never say that right. Wednesday, October 17th, 2007. So she referred to the AeroPress to make a delicious cup of coffee, and that Farhad had mentioned. Wait, is that what that is? Where am I? Farhad Manju of Salon says the AeroPress has the AP has an AeroPress that makes a delicious cup of. That's kind of confusing. So I don't know if his actual review. This is a mention by Zini Jardin, but anyway, so because of Farhad, because of Salon, because of all that, a random encounter with a press release from the Aerobee guys making a coffee press. What? We got it. And if nothing else, I use my AeroPress each day, due in no small way to this. All of this that I've just described. And generally speaking, Salon was fun. The train commute, that kind of put me in the mindset of, do I really need a car? And I've already talked about this many times here in Vegas. I have been car-free and carefree for going on, I think it'll be 7 years in February since I sold my car. And as I've mentioned, my car was sitting for 7 months. I never used it. With Salon, I had a car. I ended up selling it to my sister. Did I drive it? I don't even know if I drove it to Sunnyvale when I moved. I don't think I did, because I had my U-Haul to drive up there. So didn't really have a car. Eventually I got a Scion XB, which I kept until I sold it 7 years ago. So the need for a car is fleeting sometimes. And if you could get away with not having a car, I highly recommend it. So really, Salon has had a lasting impact on several things. How I would look at community tools for discussions amongst people who don't know each other, and that will figure into my my Muni project here in Vegas. And the AeroPress, definitely something to think about. On that note, I will leave you. I'm gonna go make a coffee real quick. You should do the same. And I got 1 hour 24 on the clock. We'll truncate some silence. Probably get it close to 1 hour 12 minutes or so. Just a guess. Don't forget, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. Always find what I'm working on. You don't have to spend any money. You can if you want. and it will go towards coffee, beans, or accessories like another AeroPress. No, I only have one. That's all you need. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.